Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the analysis of YOLENO TV. I hope you're well from wherever you're watching this channel. Now, I have a summarized version of the AUC debate, especially focusing on the statements which Raila Odinga gave there, which I've actually compiled for your own viewing, ladies and gentlemen. So before I present those videos, please take this opportunity, like this video. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this channel because that is the only way you support the work of this channel. Thank you so much for that support. So without wasting a lot of time, let's dive into these videos, ladies and gentlemen.
Ali Yusuf. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to invite His Excellency Raila Odinga to share his opening remarks. Your Excellency, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Ambassador Konjit, my co-panelists here, His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Yusuf, and His Excellency Mr. Richard, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Africa. Africa, hamjambo, bonsoir. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah ta'ala wa barakatuh. Boa noite. I am delighted to have opportunity today to stand before you as the son of Africa. I was born in Kenya, but I'm told that my grandparents came from the Sudan. I am a father of 4, a grandfather of 5, and a husband of 1 that I know of. I am an engineer by profession, and I have been an academic. I have also been a public servant. I've been a member of parliament. I've also been a prime minister and also leader of opposition. In those capacities, I've tried to do my best, and I've gained a lot of experience in terms of management of public affairs. I stand here as an Pan-Africanist and an Afro-optimist. 2 months ago, that is on the 21st of October, this year, we were here in Addis Ababa. We had been invited as members of the families of the founding fathers of the African Union to come and witness the reopening of the Africa Hall. That's the hall where the OAU was launched in 1963. And we're happy to be here with Madam Ambassador Konjit, who was there as a young girl at that time. It is now 61 years since the launch of the Organization of African Unity. And at that time, if you read the speeches of the founding fathers on that day, they were very passionate, and all of them talked about African unity. Where there was a difference was, when do we achieve this unity? There are those who under the school of thought that the unity now, and those who said no, we need to be gradual in this. Let us first build the building blocks, the regional unions, which will eventually translate into formation of the African Union as a whole. But now we have they came up 50 years later with Vision 2063, which now hopes to get Africa united, one union government by 2030, and move on to attain the vision, the wishes of the founding fathers of Africa. I say that I have the experience. I've been part of this movement for changing the continent. We know that some achievements have been made. Africa is now completely liberated. but there's still work to do. And I believe that I have what it takes to get us where we want to do. In the field of education, in the field of health, in the field of value addition to the abundant wealth that we have on the continent, in the field of trade, inter-African trade. I have acted as the African Union High Representative on infrastructure. And in this I know that we have very comprehensive programs in PIDA, Program for Infrastructure Development of the continent. What remains is action. And what I want to promise the African people is that I am going to lead from the front to ensure that we achieve the visions of the founding fathers of our continent. I thank you.
And now we're moving into the second round. And if you're just joining us, we're beaming live from the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Addis Ababa to be specific. Excellency Raila Odinga, first for your answer. 4 minutes, sir.
Thank you. Africa is, of course, the least developed continent by comparison. Look at economic statistics. But this is because there are historical reasons why Africa is where it is today. And we will say that Africa does not need to remain here. We need to develop Africa. There are several factors which work against Africa. For example, the international financial infrastructure has worked very much against Africa, because African countries have been made to borrow money at a very high rate of interest compared to other countries of the same status as the African countries. So we need to address the issue of rearranging the international financial infrastructure. That is, I think, one of the major starting points. Now, Africa is the richest continent on the planet Earth in terms of raw materials. But it's a paradox that Africa also is the poorest in terms of living conditions. We say that we need not remain for perpetually the source of raw materials for industrial west or east. That we need to do value addition to raw materials which are coming out of Africa before we export them. And then we've also said that Africa needs to trade more with itself. There's big potential. Like the African Development Bank today says that 7 out of the 20 fastest growing economies in this year are going to be African countries. They're much higher than Europe. We're only competing with Asia. So it is important that Africa enhances the trade with itself. The inter-African trade today stands at just mere 15%. Now we have the African Free Trade Area organization that was launched now 3 years ago, but not much has been achieved. Some of the reasons are issues that are actually solvable. The non-tariff barriers to trade that have been imposed by respective African countries. Things like standards, which are different from one country to the other country, making it difficult for goods to move freely across the borders. Then modalities of payment. And then it's the other issue of infrastructure. I worked for 5 years as the African Union High Representative on Infrastructure Development. And here is another problem, because goods cannot move freely because of lack of adequate infrastructure within the continent. Kenya exported tea to Ghana, and it took 3 months of tea to travel from Kenya to Ghana. We have major infrastructure projects, the high-speed continental railway, the inter-African highways, Cape to Cairo, Tunis to Cape, Dakar to Djibouti, Dakar, Lagos, Mombasa, and so on and so forth. All these need to be developed. Energy is another factor. Energy is too expensive, but we can reduce the cost of energy and go green in the continent.
Aspiration to silence guns by 2020, conflicts persist. How will you foster African solutions to ensure effective and durable conflict prevention, management, and resolution? And how do you plan to accelerate Africa's push for a permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council? Ladies and gentlemen, our esteemed candidates, the first to answer this round of questions will be His Excellency Raila Amolo Odinga. You have 4 minutes, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much. Well, silencing the guns on the continent. As you know that in 2013, the EU met and passed a resolution to silence the guns by 2020. We are today in 2024, and the guns are not silent. They're very loud, roaring all over the continent. We need to address the causative factors of these conflicts. There are some which are conflict caused by poverty or deprivation. Some of them by conflict within the society, again, things like ethnicity and so on. Some of them are externally influenced or promoted. Some are religious and so on. So there's not a common factor. But what you need to do is to address the causative factors which could translate into these conflicts throughout the continent. And this is what I will do myself. First, as you know that all African countries are not at the same levels of development. Those which are more developed, like for example in terms of governance, there are some areas where you have got exclusions of people, and as a result of this, there's some people move to use other means. We need to find a way of creating an environment for dialogue within our societies so that we can be able to prevent these differences, conflict ending up into violent confrontation between the various groups. We don't need to put a time span, but I'm sure that it is possible to end these conflicts and stop the guns by 2035, in my view. The other one is the issue of Africa's representation on the Security Council. This is something that has been long overdue. As you know, that the UN was formed at a time when most parts of Africa were colonies. And that's why the UN structure as today does not deal with the realities of the world today. And the situation where you have 5 countries sitting in the Security Council with veto powers, and Africa is not represented, a continent with 1.4 billion people, is not tenable and it's not accessible. And that's why I'm not going to talk about Africa's representation, but we're going to insist that Africa must get 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council. This is only fair, because we are a continent of 55 sovereign nations. We cannot be excluded when Europe has got 3 permanent representations on the Security Council. Permanent representation with the veto powers is a must for Africa. And this I'm going to insist when I'm elected. If the heads of state of Africa sees fit that I should lead this, I will work together with all the leadership of the continent to ensure that the continent gets a fair treatment on the international scene.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya.
Esteemed candidates, On the topic of reviving Pan-Africanism and countering external influence, Pan-Africanism is declining, and external powers and internal divisions challenge Africa's integration efforts. What specific steps will you take to rekindle the spirit of Pan-Africanism, counter big power politics on the continent, mobilize African countries behind a common integration agenda, ensure resource self-reliance, and position regional economic communities at the center of this process?
Thank you. Well, I mentioned earlier on about the inter-African trade, which today stands just at 15%. Inter-European trade, on the other hand, stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade stands at 60%. Africa trades more with the external world than with itself, wasting a lot of resources. Now, how did Europeans come from behind and leapfrog and overtake Africa? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. But here we need to now look forward to see how we can be able to make use of this huge domestic market that we have. We have a population of 1.4 billion people, and that is what has helped China. China did two things. One was to train the younger generation, the youth, so that they had a very highly skilled manpower. And when they liberalized the economy, the manufacturing unit in the West rushed to China. If you go to China, for example, take the automobile, the Ford, the Jeep, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Toyota, the Nissan, they're all there in China. And because there's cheap, highly skilled, cheap labor, secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. It can be a bonus or it can be a curse. If the youth are not empowered, given requisite knowledge and skills, they become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation. It is a pity today that many African youths drown in the Mediterranean trying to seek greener pastures in Europe because we have not created conditions that can retain them here. Now we are saying that we want to create a situation where every African youth must be connected to the internet, and using the artificial intelligence and the information technology, we can be able to give this youth opportunity to work anywhere in the world when they're staying here on the continent. This is something that we are going to address, empowerment of the African youth, and together with the African woman, so that we create a workforce that will be helped in terms of wealth creation on the continent. This will enable Africa to leapfrog and to catch up with the rest of the world. I'm saying that I want to be a vehicle to be used to help Africa to get there. We will work together with all the leadership in the continent so that Africa moves.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Thank you very much, Your Excellency Raila Odinga. Finishing us.
Well, we know where we are as African Union, and that's why the heads of state came up with that committee on reforms, which was headed by former president, current Rwanda President Kagame. The chairmanship has now been passed over to Honorable William Ruto, President of Kenya. I have had long discussions with President Kagame when he was chairing that committee, because I was working as a high representative of the AU on issues of infrastructure. And I know the kind of frustrations that you feel working that way. I know that 93% of the resolutions that are passed by the heads of state at the assembly are never implemented. Now, there's some of them are resolutions which were probably not necessary. Some of them are not implementable, but majority of them are just not implemented. Some have to do with the structure and management of the AU at the headquarters. I'm not trying to pass any judgment here because I know that Mr. Paki has worked very hard to try to make the organization move forward. The other one has been the issue of funding, which has been a major challenge, and look at other alternative sources of funding. When I was there as high rep on infrastructure development, we came up with a proposal to set up an infrastructure fund for Africa, and using the African resources, because many of African countries have got a lot of money in the process of constructing some of these infrastructures. I mentioned the Trans-African railway network, Lagos to Cairo, the high speed. Then you have got Beira in Mozambique to Lobito in Angola and Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then you have got the LAPSET, which will come from Lamu in Kenya, running through South Sudan, Central Africa to Karibi in Cameroon, to create a land bridge that opens the interior of Africa and gives these landlocked countries in the continent access to the sea. So some of these are possible, but we need to think out of the box and ensure that most of these reforms which are being proposed are implemented. We were talking about energy, which is a very major issue, and we have got the Grand Inga in the Congo, which can actually power the entire continent with power pools, southern power pool, eastern power pool, central, western, and northern power pool. That will help us to lower the cost of energy in the continent. That would be a revolutionary change on the continent. Then you've got the connectivity, fiber optic connectivity, open skies, opening up the skies for movement of people, and then visas. To do visas is a big issue. Many African businessmen cannot travel across the continent because they don't have visas.
Excellency, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Les 4 minutes se sont écoulées. Nous allons maintenant suivre.
We are going now.
The candidates each have 2 minutes to share their closing remarks. Programming this evening, please take your seats. Thank you. May we assemble all our candidates, please. As we proceed into the last part of our debate today, MJADALA Africa Leadership Debate 2024. And we want to say a special thank you to our audience around the world. The questions you sent truly informed the kinds of questions that we then asked our panel here. And we are very happy that you were very involved. It goes to show that indeed the Africa we want is in your hands and that you are actively involved in doing this together. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we are back to our last session. My name is Anita Erskine, and I'm joined here by my colleague Fatima Sharif, who is our French speaker. We will start this round with His Excellency Raila Odinga.
Thank you. I am delighted to have had the opportunity to address our people of Africa. And as I've said, I am ready to work for Africa. There are reforms that will be necessary so that AU can work more effectively. One of these reforms will be financial reforms, so that we are able to bring in the African private sector into the funding. I mentioned also the issue of sovereign funds that we can use. We can create a fund that will enable AU to do all its work. Then there's issue of 0.2% of the duty, which only 17 countries are remitting. I will work to ensure that all the countries actually pay their dues to the Union. This is what happens in the European Union, and that's why European Union is able to even fund African Union. It's a shame. We can be able to fund this organization out of our own resources on the continent, and this is what I'm going to try to do. And I said that I am ready on day one when I'm appointed. I will not need any kind of induction. I'm ready to work for the continent, and I will offer my best. The days of Africa have come. The African lion will begin to roar and tell its Asian tiger counterpart and the European bear and the American jaguar that this is going to be Africa's millennium, the 2000.
Dear candidate, I'm really sorry to interrupt you once again, but these are the rules of the debate. Nous allons maintenant, mesdames et messieurs.
No, that was a session of MJADALA Africa. I believe you must have followed the proceedings. I just decided to sample few videos, especially from Raila Odinga, because I believe most of you Kenyans were concerned about what Raila Odinga was going to issue there as a response. And you can make your own conclusions based on what Raila Odinga said there, whether he performed better than the rest, or whether Mahmoud Ali Yusuf performed better than Raila, or whether Sir Richard performed better than the two. That is up to you to make a judgment on. But again, after that debate, there are heads of state who are going to make a decision whether they can now jump ship and vote for someone they had not initially thought they would vote for. So that debate will actually is one that will help many other people to make decisions of that nature. So perhaps if you watch this video and you've not subscribed, take 1 second and subscribe, like this video. Until you catch up again, stay safe and stay blessed.